Happy Wednesday, everyone. Welcome back to another day of asynchronous learning. What we're going to do right now is we're going to go over the Learn activities on K-12 and Google Classroom and talk a little bit more in depth about President Cleveland, where are you? We're going to be focusing on the character interactions. We're going to be talking about the history and fiction of it all. And we're going to talk about the plot effects that we can see throughout the entire story. So let's start off by just talking about our characters. So authors let you know a lot about the meaning of their texts through how their characters interact. So by completing these activities, we're going to be able to examine how the brothers, particularly in this story, interact. So in President Cleveland, Where Are You?, the narrator, Jerry, let me get my pen. Give me a sec. There we go, pen. All right, our narrator, Jerry, often interacts with other characters. Some of those interactions will be more important than others. A major interaction reveals important information about the characters, events, or ideas of the story. And there will be evidence to support that in the major interaction in the text. So we're going to look at the interactions between Jerry and his brother, Armin. And it's important to remember that Armin is the older brother. All right, so let's continue on. So if we look at Jerry and Armin, Armin is a major character in the story. Therefore, his interactions with Jerry should be read carefully. Carefully. Armin is different from Jerry in the first part of the story. Armin is more mature than his brother. So let's talk about, what does mature mean? Mature may be that they're more responsible. Maybe they have more to do. Maybe they take care of others. So those are just a couple examples of why they may be more mature. Think about your older brothers and sisters. They are more mature because they have more responsibilities. So let's look at this quote from the story. Maturity. He regarded me with contempt. Rita already gave me 15 cents, and I'm throwing in a quarter. Albert handed over a dime, all that's left of his birthday money. Is that all you can do? A nickel? Aw, come on, I protested. I haven't got a single Ken Maynard left, and I was going to buy some cards this afternoon. Ken Maynard, he snorted. Who's more important, him or your father? So which of these statements below does Armin make that shows his mature understanding of what is important? Is it him saying, Ken Maynard? Well, that's just saying someone's name. I don't know if that really displays any type of emotional maturity. He asked the question, who's more important, him or your father? By asking that question, it's making him think through his process. So maybe that's it. And then the final option is that all you can do? Well, when I look at these three answers, I think, who's more important, him or your father? That's a question that shows his maturity because he's focusing on the emotional relationships around him, which is something that older people tend to think about more than younger people. All right, moving on. Oh, I forgot to erase that. That's not the correct answer. I was just testing out earlier. All right, so if we look at that quote one more time, when Jerry finally gives Armin a dime for their father's gift, Armin sarcastically remarks, I hate to take your last cent. Now remember, sarcasm is when we say something we don't actually mean in order to give an effect. So he doesn't actually hate to take his last cent. He's glad to take his last cent. So how does this comment affect us as readers? Does it make Jerry seem more generous or giving? Does it make Jerry appear more unintelligent? Does it show how cruel Jerry is? Or does it make Jerry seem selfish? All right, so I want you to think on your own for a second. If you were to answer this without me, what would you put as your answer? I'm going to give you 10 seconds to think of an answer. All right. What do you think the correct answer is? I hate to take your last cent. This is Armin talking to Jerry. Well, for someone keeping the money to themselves, that makes me think of someone who is selfish. So I think the correct answer is the last one. Get my pen back out. I think it makes him selfish. So he's not willing to give up something for his family. All right, now we see Jerry change a lot in this story. So often a character changes because of their interactions with another character. Think about how Jerry acts after Armin scolds him for not giving enough money for their father's gift. Jerry admits, "I thought of how I had betrayed Armin and worst of all, my father." This shows that Jerry has changed. He had acted selfishly, what we discovered with that last question. So he had acted selfishly. He had hoarded his money for Ken Maynard's card, and then it was not even available. Now he realizes that he was wrong. So let's note this evidence that supports this idea. The first reason is that Jerry races home to join up with Armin to buy the gift. If he was still acting selfishly, he probably wouldn't have done that. And when he discovers he is too late, he says his chest hurts, so showing the guilt that he's feeling. So why does his chest hurt? He feels guilty, which guilt is an emotion someone feels when they've done something wrong and they feel that they should have done something else. So we have learned that Jerry is capable of change. He shows remorse, responsibility, and growth. So how does Armin change in this story? We see that Jerry's done a lot of changing, but how has Armin changed? Well, if we read this interaction between Jerry and Armin, when he says, "He looked at me for a long moment. At first, his eyes were hard, but then they softened. He smiled at me almost sadly and touched my arm. I turned away from him because I felt naked and exposed. 'It's all right,' he said gently. 'Maybe you've learned something.' The words were gentle, but they held a curious dignity, the dignity remaining even when his voice suddenly cracked on the last syllable." So what does this interaction tell us about Armin? Well, let's take a look at what he says. He says, "It's all right. Maybe you have learned something." And the words were gentle and they held a curious dignity. All right, so dignity was one of our key words. And remember, dignity is kind of like honor. All right? And he says, "It's all right. Maybe you've learned something." He's being kind and gentle to his little brother, which is a change because he first was judgmental and he moves to gentleness because he cares about his brother. So we see that change in Armin. Now, let's take a look at how the history is affecting this. So, the Civilian Conservation Corps is a significant portion of our story. So the Great Depression created the biggest employment crisis the United States has ever seen. While many people wanted to work, there was simply no paid work available. And President Roosevelt saw a way to get important work done across the country and return thousands of men to work with dignity. So we're going to watch a video right now that tells us a little bit more about the Great Depression and President Roosevelt's contribution.
If you were to come to this country and you were at LaGuardia Airport, you would be at an airport that Roosevelt and the New Deal had built. And that if you went over the Triborough Bridge and then through the Lincoln Tunnel and continued west across the country on the Blue Ridge Parkway on the Skyline Drive, took Chicago's subway, went all the way across to the great dams of Bonneville and Grand Coulee. All of this was done under Roosevelt and the New Deal, and that's our legacy in America today.
I think what FDR was able to do somehow was to make the government, which is all of us. I mean, we think of the government as something out there, but he saw it as the collective responsibility of the people to people in need. He changed the relationship between government, business, and labor forever. But those words are just so abstract. What he did in those programs was to bring the force of the collective power of the country to bear on helping people to get through their daily lives.
Before Franklin Delano Roosevelt, there had been no unemployment compensation or Social Security, no regulation of the stock market, no federal guarantee of bank deposits or labor's right to bargain, no national minimum wage or maximum hours, no federal commitment to high employment, and no price supports for farmers or federal funds for electric power with which to light their homes. But for all the New Deal's achievements, the American economy was still struggling in 1939. Many of those who most needed help were still not getting it, and Congress was no longer willing to follow Roosevelt's lead. The president's attention was already beginning to turn away from reform, toward readying a reluctant country for the new crisis that now threatened to engulf the world. And FDR had begun seriously to consider doing something no man, not even Theodore Roosevelt, had dared to do: run for a third consecutive term as President of the United States.
How can we study history? How can we live through the things that we have lived through and complacently go on allowing the same causes over and over again to put us through these same horrible experiences? Anyone who thinks must think of the next war as suicide. Eleanor Roosevelt.
All right, so we just finished watching that video about a little bit about President Roosevelt and the Great Depression. So let's talk about the different aspects of the video. So first, let's talk about how President Roosevelt created jobs for many people. That's probably one of the most significant things that he did. He also was dealing with a war, specifically World War II. He also created minimum wage, which none of you guys are working jobs right now, but minimum wage is really important because it creates a standard for all businesses to decide what is the least amount that you can pay. So it protects the workers to be paid a little bit of money in order to not be cheated out of doing a lot of work for no money. So he created minimum wage, which affects a lot of people nowadays. So this is the background from everything that we are reading. So let's take a moment and think about how the historical context affects the textual evidence. So let's look at a quote and decide if this is textual evidence or telling us about the history that it is coming into. So always be asking yourself when we're reading these details, is it something directly from the text or is this something about the way the country was? So he returned from the factory. He was a steady worker when the shop had enough work. We know that this is a quote from our story, so this is textual evidence. This shows how children entertained themselves with little money during the Depression. This gives us a little bit more information about the history going on with children during the Depression. Families were so short on money that kids were willing to do extra chores for others to earn spending money. This also provides a little bit of context about the family environment during the Great Depression. In this time, things we now consider basic necessities were luxuries. Another historical context. and my shoes are practically falling apart. Now, this kind of ties into the previous one. It tells us that a lot of people couldn't afford normal things, basic necessities, but we know that because this is a quotation, it is textual evidence from our story. I had spent 2 afternoons washing floors for Mrs. Belander and received a quarter. This is also textual evidence. So this story is fiction, which means fake. It's not a true story, but it's based on historical fact. These are real events that did take place in our country. The events in the story are not true, but they are believable because they are laid on the foundation of what was really happening at the time in American history. In doing so, our author creates a sense of reality in the story. So if we look at this quote, on those windswept, leaf-tumbling afternoons, we gathered after school on the sidewalk in front of St. Jude's parochial school, and we swapped and bargained and matched for the cards. Because a Ken Maynard serial was playing at the Globe every Saturday afternoon, he was the most popular cowboy of all, and one of his cards was worth at least 10 of any other kind. Raleigh Tremaine had a treasure of 30 or so. He guarded them jealously. He'd match you for the other cars, but he'd rest his Ken Maynards only when the other kids threatened to leave him out of the competition altogether. So this is considered a fake story because Raleigh Tremaine and Jerry are not true people. But Ken Maynard is a real person. We have real cards that are being traded, and that really does happen in life. And we're talking about schools that a lot of people went to. And so this history and fiction are working together to create this historical fiction. So consider for a moment how Cormier uses fiction to revise history. So which points of his story are historically accurate? Well, when he talks about the Great Depression, that is a true event. He didn't make that up. Which points are fictional? Are characters. They are not real. How does history shape the story? It gives us background on the financial stress. How do fictional points transform history? It creates a captivating story. So it's interesting for us to learn. All right, let's talk about the plot effects. So if you remember back to last unit, we talked about the plot mountain. We have exposition, which starts our story. Then we move into complicating incident, then rising action, and then our climax. We have some falling action, and then our resolution, making our plot mountain. And if you forget those terms, it's up on the board. The series of events in a story is called the narrative arc or the plot mountain. A narrative arc goes up as the story builds. Then at its climax, the story hits a high point. Finally, the arc curves back down to the narrative's ending. Now, if we have read the whole story of President Cleveland, Where Are You? We're able to identify the different parts of this plot mountain because we know the full story. So how does the exposition introduce the main conflict? Well, let's look at how the author introduces the story setting and the main character in the exposition. Jerry is the main character and also the narrator. So he's both a character and narrator. He is 11 years old and collects cowboy cards. We learn that he most wants a Ken Maynard card. The setting is a poorer neighborhood during the 1930s in the United States. This country is experiencing the Great Depression, a time of extraordinary economic uncertainty. So how does the setting affect the main character and introduce the main conflict? Well, the setting shows that people are struggling financially. Jerry needs money to buy Ken Maynard cards to trade with his friends, but his brother asks him for money for a father's birthday gift. This sets up the problem for Jerry? Does he do the right thing and put up his money for his father's gift, or does he spend it on his own selfish desires? So through the dialogue, we are able to see not only our characters change, but we also see the conflict exposed. So how much money have you got? He whispered. You in some kind of trouble? I asked, excitement rising in me as I remembered the blackmail plot of a movie at the Globe a month before. He shook his head in annoyance. Look, he said, it's Pa's birthday tomorrow. I think we ought to chip in and buy him something. I reached into my pocket and caressed the coins. Here, I said carefully, pulling out a nickel. If we have all give a nickel, we should have enough to buy him something pretty nice. I reached into my pocket and caressed the coins. Here, I said carefully, pulling out a nickel. If we all gave a nickel, we should have enough to buy him something pretty nice. He regarded me with contempt. Rita already gave me 15 cents, and I'm throwing in a quarter. Albert handed over a dime, all that's left of his birthday money. Is that all you can do with a nickel? So these are important points in the story by showing us how Armin feels about Jerry. He's disappointed that Jerry can only think about the card he wants, and the reader has an idea about how the author also feels about his main character. So this develops our conflict. During our rising action, the plot thickens. We see that Jerry gets extra money from his father. He plans to get a cowboy card. Jerry's brother asks him to contribute to a birthday gift for his father, and Jerry and his friends find out the president cards have replaced the cowboy cards. A signed glove is given to whomever can complete a set, and Jerry races to the store to try to contribute more of his money to the gift. How do these events make the reader feel? Well, the story quickens. So these build upon each other, and we are anxious to see what will happen. And then we are able to see the climax, falling action, and resolution. So right now, I want you to go to your practice Jamboard that's posted on the Google Classroom, and I want you to answer some of the practice questions based off of what we just learned. In class tomorrow, we're going to talk about the answers, and you can correct your answers then. So good luck, and thank you for listening.